every day.
The bronze scales of his cuirass dug into his shoulders, a constant, chafing reminder of his own uselessness. For 40 days, Eliab had worn this armor, and for 40 days, its only purpose was to weigh him down in a trench of shame. He could feel the grit of the Elah Valley floor embedding itself into the leather of his sandals, a permanent stain of cowardice. From across the valley, the voice came again, a booming echo of Israel's disgrace, and every word was a hammer blow to his pride. He, the firstborn of Jesse, the one who had stood before the prophet Samuel, tall and kingly, only to be passed over. Have you ever been so sure of your own calling, only to watch it be given to someone you considered utterly insignificant? Have you felt the fire of destiny in your bones, only for the world to douse it with the cold water of another's success? It is a unique kind of torment, a spiritual poison that turns righteous ambition into bitter envy. For Eliab, this wasn't just a battlefield. It was a theater for his personal humiliation, and God himself seemed to be the director. He watched his brothers, Abinadab and Shammah, huddle with the other soldiers, their faces grim masks of fear. They were meant to be heroes, the pride of Bethlehem. Instead, they were prisoners of a single man's voice. The injustice of it all was a physical ache in Eliab's chest. A whole army, the chosen people of Yahweh, held hostage by a Philistine brute and their own king's unraveling sanity. And now, into this tableau of failure, a new figure was walking. Small, unburdened by armor, smelling of sheep and not of war. It was David, his brother, the boy. And with his arrival, the dull ache of injustice in Eliab's heart began to sharpen into a blade of pure rage. This rage was a familiar heat, a fire kindled years ago in the low light of their family home when the oil of the prophet had bypassed him. It was the same fire that now flared as David, with the audacity of a child wandering into a council of warriors, began asking questions. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? The words meant to inspire were salt in Eliab's wounds. He grabbed his younger brother's arm, his grip tight with a fury that had been simmering for 40 days. "Why have you come down here?" he spat, his voice a low hiss that cut through the nervous murmurs of the nearby soldiers. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." David pulled his arm away, his eyes holding not guilt, but a clarity that infuriated Eliab even more. "What have I done now?" David asked, his voice calm. "Can't I even speak?" The simplicity of the question was the ultimate insult. It was the question of a child who could not comprehend the weight of the bronze, the sting of the dust, the gnawing terror that had hollowed out the souls of seasoned soldiers. Eliab saw only arrogance, a shepherd boy playing at being a man. He didn't see faith. He saw recklessness. He didn't hear a divine calling. He heard youthful pride. Every soldier who overheard their exchange saw a family squabble, but for Eliab, it was the climax of his spiritual war. He, the soldier, was paralyzed by the visible giant. David, the shepherd, was moved by the invisible God. The injustice was that God's logic made no sense to a man of war. He watched, disgusted, as David turned away and repeated his questions to other men, his resolve unshaken by Eliab's scorn. The words traveled up the chain of command, a ridiculous rumor that finally reached the king's tent. Eliab expected the boy to be rebuked, sent home with a cuff to the ear. But then, the impossible happened. A royal guard descended the hill and summoned David to the presence of Saul. A bitter laugh escaped Eliab's lips. Let the king see the boy's foolishness. Let the king burden him with armor he couldn't possibly wear. Let reality finally crush the fantasy world his little brother lived in. He leaned back against the dusty trench wall, the sun beating down. and watched his brother walk toward the king's tent, a solitary figure moving against a tide of fear. The battle for Israel was about to be fought, but the battle within Eliab's soul, between his pride and God's promise, was reaching its own violent breaking point. He was sure he knew how this story would end, with his brother's death and his own bitter vindication. He was wrong. The first sign was when David emerged from the king's tent, not clad in the gleaming bronze of Saul's armor, but in his simple shepherd's tunic. He walked not to the armory for a spear, but to the brook in the valley. Eliab watched with a mixture of horror and contempt as his brother selected 5 smooth stones against a 9-foot giant whose spear was like a weaver's beam. The entire army held its breath, a collective gasp of disbelief. This was not a battle, it was a sacrifice. Eliab felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It was the dread of watching a lamb walk willingly toward a lion, and the shame of knowing that lamb was his own flesh and blood. As David walked onto the valley floor, Goliath's laughter rolled across the field like thunder. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" The giant cursed David by his gods, Dagon and Ashtoreth, his voice a torrent of blasphemy. But David's reply was not a shout of defiance. It was a declaration of war on a different plane. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The name, the Lord Almighty, hung in the air. For 40 days, that name had been a prayer of desperation in the trenches. Now it was a weapon on the lips of a boy. The spiritual battle had been made visible, and then everything moved. David ran, not away, but toward the giant. The sling was a blur in his hand. Eliab saw the small, dark shape of the stone arc through the air, impossibly fast, impossibly straight. He saw it disappear into the forehead of the giant. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the wind whispering through the valley. Goliath stood motionless, his eyes wide with a surprise that would be his last expression. Then he fell. Not backward, but forward, his face hitting the dirt of the valley he had claimed for his own. The thud of his body was the single most definitive sound Eliab had ever heard. It was the sound of an idol shattering. It was the sound of fear breaking. It was the sound of Eliab's world crumbling. A roar erupted from the Israelite lines, a primal scream of shock, joy, and ferocious release. They poured out of their trenches, Eliab among them, his legs moving before his mind could process what his eyes had just seen. He watched as David took the giant's own sword and severed his head, a gruesome and powerful ritual that sealed the victory. This was not just a military triumph, it was a theological statement. The shepherd had not only defeated the warrior, but he had done so using the enemy's own strength against him. The injustice Eliab had felt for years, the feeling of being overlooked, was suddenly reframed. It wasn't injustice, it was a divine plan he had been too proud to see. As he charged toward the fleeing Philistines, the weight of his own armor felt different. It was no longer the weight of shame, but the humbling weight of a man who had just witnessed God honor the faith of a boy over the strength of an army. And us? How often do we stand in our own heavy armor of experience and cynicism, judging the very miracles God is trying to perform with the simple, foolish stones we overlook? The account of this day is forever registered in 1 Samuel 17.